The train's whistle pierced the afternoon air like a death knell. Gideon's hands tightened on the reins as his stallion Damascus shifted restlessly beneath him. The black gelding could sense his rider's tension. Animals always knew when their humans were about to face something they'd rather run from. Clearwater Ridge's train station buzzed with unusual activity. Word had spread about the cattle baron's mysterious bride, and half the town had found excuses to be present for her arrival. Mrs. Henderson clutched her market basket like a shield, whispering furiously to the pharmacist's wife. 3 cowboys from the competing Double R ranch leaned against the platform railing, grins splitting their sun-weathered faces. "Blackthorn's finally getting hitched," one of them drawled loud enough for Gideon to hear. "Wonder what kind of desperate woman would take him on." Gideon's jaw clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. Let them talk. In an hour he'd have his plain, practical wife, and life would continue as it must. The locomotive thundered into the station, belching steam and smoke that temporarily shrouded everything in grey haze. When it cleared, passengers began emerging from the cars. Traveling salesmen, a family with squalling children, an elderly minister clutching a worn Bible. Then she appeared. Gideon's breath caught in his throat like he'd been punched. The woman, stepping carefully down from the train car, moved with unconscious grace, one gloved hand gathering her dark blue traveling dress, the other holding a small carpet bag. But it wasn't her elegant movements that struck him motionless. It was her face. Plain, the word seemed like blasphemy now. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones that caught the afternoon light, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Rich auburn hair was swept up beneath a simple hat, with tendrils escaping to frame her face. She was beautiful. Not in the obvious way of saloon girls or pampered ranchers' daughters, but with a quiet, devastating beauty that hit him like lightning. She looked around the platform uncertainly, clearly searching for someone. When those grey eyes found his, Gideon felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that had nothing to do with arranged marriages or business partnerships. He dismounted and approached, his boots echoing on the wooden platform. Up close, she was even more striking. A light dusting of freckles across her nose spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of sunshine, despite her obvious Eastern refinement. "Miss Ashworth?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She looked up at him. She barely reached his shoulder, and something flickered in her expression. Fear? Disappointment? He couldn't tell, but it made his stomach twist. "Mr. Blackthorn." Her voice was soft but clear, with just a hint of Boston accent. You're not what I expected." The honest admission surprised him. "Neither are you." A blush painted her cheeks pink, and she looked down at her hands. "Uncle Mortimer said you'd been told I was plain. I suppose he wanted to manage expectations." Gideon felt a surge of anger toward the man who had described this woman as plain. Either Mortimer Ashworth was blind, or he deliberately misled them both. "Your uncle has a strange definition of plain." She met his eyes again, and he saw something there. Hope, maybe, or just relief that he wasn't immediately repulsed by her appearance. "Shall we collect your belongings?" "This is all I have." She gestured to the single carpet bag. "Uncle Mortimer said I should travel light, that everything I needed would be provided." The slight hesitation in her voice told him there was more to that story, but the platform wasn't the place for such conversations. The crowd was pressing closer, eager to get a good look at the new Mrs. Blackthorn-to-be. "My carriage is waiting." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. Her touch was light but warm through the fabric of his jacket. As they walked toward his waiting buggy, he caught the subtle scent of lavender and something else, something uniquely, that made his pulse quicken. "Mr. Blackthorn," she said quietly as he helped her into the carriage, "I think we should discuss the arrangements. I know this situation is unusual for both of us." He climbed up beside her, acutely aware of her proximity in the small space. "What did your uncle tell you about this arrangement?" "That you needed a wife to help manage your social obligations and that I—" She paused, her fingers tightening. "On her reticule, that I needed a husband to secure my future. He said you were a practical man who understood that love was a luxury neither of us could afford." The words hit him like physical blows. Love was a luxury. Looking at this woman, at Cordelia, the idea seemed absurd. She was exactly the kind of woman a man could love, should love, would be lucky to love. "Your uncle seems to have strong opinions about practical matters," he said carefully. "He's been my guardian since my parents died 3 years ago. He knows what's best for everyone." But her voice carried a note of doubt that made Gideon wonder exactly what kind of man Mortimer Ashworth really was. The ride to the ranch passed in careful conversation about the weather, the journey from Boston, and the landscape of Texas. But underneath the polite words, Gideon sensed currents he didn't understand. Fear in her voice when she mentioned her uncle, sadness when she spoke of her parents, and something else, something like resignation that made him want to demand answers. As they crested the hill overlooking the Blackthorn Ranch, Cordelia drew in a sharp breath. The sprawling house and extensive outbuildings spread before them, cattle dotting the rolling grassland as far as the eye could see. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time since he'd met her, her voice held genuine wonder. "It's home," he said simply, then paused. "It'll be your home too after we're married." She turned to look at him, those storm-grey eyes searching his face. "Mr. Blackthorn, what exactly do you expect from this marriage?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Gideon found himself studying her face, noting the subtle signs of strain around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly in her lap. This wasn't just about business arrangements or practical marriages. Something else was driving this union, something that had put shadows in her beautiful eyes. "I expect," he said slowly, "that we'll figure it out as we go." But even as he said the words, Gideon knew that whatever game Mortimer Ashworth was playing, it was far more complicated than a simple arranged marriage. The ranch house kitchen smelled of cornbread and coffee, but Cordelia barely touched the meal Miguel's wife, Rosa, had prepared. She sat across from Gideon at the massive oak table, hyper-aware of his every movement as he carved his steak with precise, economical motions. The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither seemed willing to cross. "You're not eating." His observation wasn't accusatory, merely factual. Cordelia pushed a piece of cornbread around her plate. "I'm not particularly hungry. It's been a long day. Rosa's feelings will be hurt if you don't at least try the stew. She's been cooking since dawn, preparing for your arrival." The gentle reprimand stung more than harsh words would have. Cordelia forced herself to take a spoonful, and the rich flavors surprised her. "It's delicious. Please tell her I said so." Gideon nodded, then set down his fork. "Miss Ashworth." "Cordelia. If we're to be married, you should call me Cordelia." Cordelia. The name sounded different in his deep voice, more intimate somehow. "I think we need to discuss the practical arrangements." Here it comes, she thought. The list of expectations, the boundaries, the cold enumeration of duties that would define their union. She'd heard this speech before in different words from Uncle Mortimer. "The ceremony is planned for Saturday. Reverend Walsh will perform it here at the ranch. Nothing elaborate, just family and the hands." "That's fine." She kept her voice, steady, professional. "What about living arrangements?" Gideon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The master bedroom is yours. I'll take the room down the hall." Cordelia's spoon clattered against her bowl. She hadn't expected that. Most arranged marriages, even loveless ones, involved shared beds for the sake of producing heirs. "I see." Unless you prefer different arrangements. His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught something underneath. Disappointment? Relief? She couldn't tell. No, that's probably best. At least initially. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to address. Cordelia found herself studying his hands as he reached for his coffee cup, strong, calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly gentle when he'd helped her from the carriage. There's something else. Gideon's voice had changed, become more cautious. Your uncle sent additional correspondence. It arrived this morning. He produced a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. Cordelia recognized Uncle Mortimer's aggressive scrawl across the front, and her stomach dropped. What does it say? I thought you should read it first. It's addressed to both of us, but... He held out the envelope. Cordelia's hands trembled. As she took it, the paper felt heavy, ominous. She broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter, scanning the contents quickly. With each line, her complexion grew paler. What is it? Gideon's voice had sharpened with concern. She couldn't speak for a moment, couldn't process what she was reading. Finally, she managed, He's lost the shipping business. All of it. The debts, the creditors, everything's gone. The dowry. There is no dowry. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Uncle Mortimer invested it all in a railroad venture that collapsed. He owes more than he can ever repay, and the creditors are coming after him. Gideon was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. What else does the letter say? Cordelia's eyes continued down the page, and her heart sank further. He's leaving for California tonight. He says by the time we receive this, he'll already be gone. Abandoning his debts. And abandoning me. The words came out more bitter than she intended. She folded the letter carefully, her movements precise and controlled. He says the marriage must proceed as planned, that you're honor-bound by your father's agreement, even without the dowry. Honor-bound. Gideon's laugh held no humor. Your uncle has an interesting understanding of honor. Cordelia stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the darkening ranch yard. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, trying to steady herself. You don't have to go through with it. The agreement was predicated on financial arrangements that no longer exist. Any reasonable person would understand. Where would you go? The quiet question stopped her cold. She turned back to face him, and the compassion in his eyes was almost her undoing. I don't know. I have distant cousins in Philadelphia, perhaps. Or I could find work as a governess, or... With what money? What references? His voice wasn't cruel, just relentlessly practical. Cordelia, your uncle has left you with nothing. No money, no connections, no family to take you in. If I put you on tomorrow's train, what exactly would you be going to? The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the chair by the window, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Nothing. I'd be going to nothing. For the first time since her parents' death, Cordelia allowed herself to truly feel the weight of her situation. She was utterly alone, completely dependent on the charity of a man who had been deceived into this arrangement just as thoroughly as she had been. I won't hold you to an agreement made under false pretenses, she said quietly. You have every right to be angry, to send me away. I'll find some way to manage. Gideon was quiet for so long that she looked up at him. His expression was unreadable, but something had changed in his posture, in the set of his shoulders. My father, he said finally, was the most honorable man I ever knew. When he gave his word, it meant something. It didn't matter if circumstances changed or if the other party proved untrustworthy. His word was his bond. Cordelia's heart sank. He was going to honor the agreement out of duty to his dead father, which meant she would spend the rest of her life knowing she was nothing more than an obligation he couldn't escape. But Gideon continued, standing and moving closer to her chair. I'm not my father, and I'm not bound by agreements made with liars and cheats. Hope and despair warred in her chest. So you're sending me away? No. The word was firm, final. I'm making you a different offer entirely. He knelt beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. Marry me, Cordelia, not because of some arrangement between dead men and dishonest uncles, but because you choose to. Stay here, because you want to build something with me, not because you have nowhere else to go. Her breath caught. You don't know me. I could be anyone, could have any number of terrible qualities. Could you? His voice was soft, almost teasing. Are you cruel? Are you dishonest? Are you the kind of woman who would abandon someone in their hour of need? No, but then you're already better than half the people I know. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. I won't lie. To you, Cordelia, I don't love you, not yet, but I could, and I hope, that maybe you could learn to care for me too. The warmth of his hands, the sincerity in his voice, the impossible kindness of his offer, it was too much. Tears she'd been holding back for 3 years finally spilled over. Why, she whispered, why would you do this for a stranger? His thumbs brushed across her knuckles, and when he spoke, his voice held a rough tenderness that made her heart race. Because sometimes a man gets a chance to choose honor over obligation, kindness over duty. Because you're not a stranger. You're the woman brave enough to travel halfway across the country to save a man she'd never met from his own loneliness, even if she didn't know it at the time. Outside, the sun had set completely, leaving only the warm glow of lamplight between them. In the distance, she could hear the gentle lowing of cattle and the soft murmur of evening settling over the ranch. So what do you say, Cordelia Ashworth? Will you marry me? The first bullet shattered the upstairs window 3 inches from Cordelia's head. Glass cascaded onto the hardwood floor as she dropped behind the windowsill, her pulse thundering in her ears. Below in the yard, muzzle flashes bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness. She counted them. 6 shooters positioned around the house, maybe more she couldn't see. They're trying to pin us down, she called to Gideon, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Her father had been right. When the shooting started, training took over. Can you see the barn? Gideon's voice came from the front door downstairs, calm and controlled. Cordelia peered carefully around the window frame. The burning structure cast shifting shadows across the yard, but she could make out movement near the collapsed roof. 2 men, maybe 3. They're using the fire as cover. Smart. There was grudging respect in Gideon's tone. Frank Kellerman was always clever, stupid but clever. Another volley of shots peppered the house, splintering wood and punching holes in the shutters. But something felt wrong about the attack. Too scattered, too random. These weren't men trying to kill. They were men trying to terrorize. Gideon, she called down, I don't think they're aiming to hit us. What do you mean? The shots are wild. If they wanted us dead, they could have killed us by now. A moment of silence then. They want us alive. At least one of us. The implication hit her like ice water. They weren't here just for revenge. They were here for her. The arranged marriage, the dowry that didn't exist, the woman who'd brought nothing but trouble to Gideon's door. This is my fault. The words escaped before she could stop them. Like hell it is. Gideon's response was immediate and fierce. You didn't ask for any of this, but she had, hadn't she? By coming here, by accepting his proposal, by staying when she should have left after reading Uncle Mortimer's letter. Now good men were going to die because of her presence. Blackthorn, Kellerman's voice carried across the yard. We know you're listening. Here's what's going to happen. You send out the girl and we'll let your men live. Go to hell, Frank. Stubborn as always. A pause, then. Boys, kill one of his cowboys. Let him know we're serious. Cordelia's breath. He caught. Through the window, she could see Miguel crouched behind the water trough, rifle ready. He was exposed, vulnerable, an easy target. No. She didn't realize she'd spoken aloud until Gideon's voice cut through the night. Nobody moves, he shouted. Frank, you want to talk, let's talk. But you harm one of my men, and this ends badly for everyone. Laughter echoed from the darkness. You're in no position to make threats, Blackthorn. Aren't I? Gideon's voice carried a new quality, something dangerous and calculating. Miguel, how many cases of dynamite do we have in the root cellar? Enough to level half the county, Patron. Cordelia's eyes widened. Dynamite. She watched as understanding dawned on the attackers. Their laughter died, replaced by urgent whispers. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. You're bluffing, Kellerman called, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Try me. Gideon's words carried the weight of absolute certainty. I've got nothing left to lose, Frank. You made sure of that when you threatened her. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Cordelia could hear her own heartbeat, the distant crackle of flames, the nervous shifting of horses in the darkness. What do you want? Kellerman finally asked. Safe passage for my men and the lady. In exchange, I'll face you. Just you. No guns. No tricks, the way our fathers would have settled it. Gideon, no. Cordelia's whisper was fierce. Don't do this for me. But he was already moving, his boots echoing on the stairs. When he reached the bedroom, his face was set with grim determination. It's the only way, he said quietly. Frank's pride won't let him back down, but he might accept a fair fight. What if he cheats? What if his men shoot you anyway? Then you take that rifle and you make them pay for it. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Cordelia, listen to me. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Her voice was fierce, desperate. You're going to win, and we're going to have that wedding, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I was worth saving. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. You already have. Before she could respond, he was kissing her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the desperate intensity of a man facing death. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. That's for luck, he said, trying to smile. That's for coming home, she corrected, and kissed him again. When Gideon descended to the yard, he carried no weapons. Kellerman emerged from the shadows, a man in his 30s, lean and bitter, with eyes that held too much anger and not enough hope. Just like the old days, Frank said, circling Gideon in the firelight, when men settled things with their fists instead of lawyers and land deeds. Your father never fought fair a day in his life, Gideon replied, matching his movement. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Frank's swing came fast and hard, but Gideon was ready. He ducked under the punch and drove his fist into Frank's ribs, hearing the satisfying grunt of pain. But Frank was younger, hungrier, and he fought like a man with nothing to lose. His next punch caught Gideon in the jaw, snapping his head back. From the window, Cordelia watched with her heart in her throat. Every blow Gideon took felt like a knife in her chest. She'd known this man for barely a day, but somewhere between his proposal and his kiss, everything had changed. The fight was brutal, desperate. Both men were bleeding, stumbling, but neither would yield. It was more than revenge now. It was about honor, about the right to build something in this harsh land. Frank landed a crushing blow to Gideon's solar plexus, doubling him over. As he gasped for air, Frank grabbed a piece of burning wood from the barn wreckage. "This is for my father," he snarled, raising the makeshift club. The rifle shot echoed across the yard like thunder. Frank Kellerman staggered backward, the burning wood falling from his hands. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Then up at the bedroom window where Cordelia stood with the smoking Winchester. "You shot me," he said, almost conversational. "You actually shot me." "I told you," Gideon wheezed, struggling to his feet. "She's worth fighting for." Frank's legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. Around the yard, his men lowered their weapons, the fight gone out of them with their leader's fall. "Get him." "To Doc Peterson," Gideon ordered. "And get off my land, all of you!" As the Kellerman gang carried their wounded leader away, Cordelia sank to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her. Her hands were shaking now, reaction setting in. When Gideon found her there, she looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "I've never shot a man before," she whispered. "You saved my life," he said simply, kneeling beside her. "That makes you the bravest woman I've ever known." "I couldn't let him hurt you. I couldn't—" Her voice broke. Gideon pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "It's over. We're safe." But as dawn broke over the Blackthorn Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, Cordelia realized that safety wasn't what she wanted anymore. What she wanted was the man holding her, the life they could build together, and the chance to prove that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. "Gideon," she said quietly, "ask me again." "Ask you what?" "To marry you. Ask me again, and I'll give you a different answer." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Cordelia Ashworth, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, "not because I have to, but because I want to, because I'm already falling in love with you." And in the growing light of a new day, with the ranch still smouldering around them, they began to plan not just a wedding, but a future neither had dared hope for. 3 days after the attack, Cordelia still woke before dawn, with her heart racing. She'd taken to sitting on the front porch in the pre-morning darkness, watching the horizon lighten while the ranch stirred to life around her. The familiar sounds, cattle lowing, roosters crowing, men calling to each other as they began their work, had become a comfort she hadn't expected. This morning, she wasn't alone. Couldn't sleep either? Gideon settled into the chair beside her, wincing slightly as he moved. His face still bore the purple remnants of Frank Kellerman's fists, and she knew his ribs ached, though he'd never admit it. "I keep thinking I hear riders coming." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Foolish, I know. They won't be back." "Not foolish at all. Takes time for your body to believe the danger's past." The understanding in his voice told her. He'd experienced this before, the aftermath that no one talked about when the fighting was over, but the fear lingered. "Sheriff Morrison came by yesterday while you were in town," he continued. "Frank's going to live. Doc Peterson got the bullet out clean. He'll face trial for the attack, but—" Gideon's jaw tightened. "His brothers and the other men scattered. Probably halfway to California by now. Will there be consequences? For me, I mean, for shooting him. Self-defense on your own property." Gideon's voice was firm. "Morrison said you likely saved my life. No charges, no questions." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky gradually lightened. Cordelia found herself stealing glances at his profile, studying the strong line of his jaw, the way the morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair. 3 days ago, she'd been a desperate woman, accepting a marriage of convenience. Now she wasn't sure what she was. "Cordelia," his voice was careful, tentative, "about what you said after the fight, about falling in love." Her stomach clenched. Had he been waiting 3 days to take it back? To gently explain that crisis made people say things they didn't. "Mean, I meant it," she said quietly, "but I understand if you need time to—" "No." The word came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "I don't need time. I need to know if you're certain. Because what I'm feeling—" He turned to face her fully. "I've never felt anything like this before, and it scares the hell out of me." The honest admission made her chest tight. "What are you feeling?" "Like I'd burn down the world to keep you safe, Like I've been waiting my whole life for you to walk off that train. He laughed, but it sounded strained. 3 days ago, I was resigned to a practical marriage. Now I can't imagine sharing my life with anyone else. The words she'd been afraid to hope for, spoken with a sincerity that made her eyes burn. Then we're both terrified. Good. His smile was soft, real. Means we're taking this seriously. Rosa appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh biscuits. The older woman had appointed herself Cordelia's protector since the attack, fussing over her like a mother hen and muttering Spanish prayers whenever she thought no one was listening. "Eat," Rosa commanded, setting the tray between them. "Both of you too skinny. How you make strong babies if you don't eat." Cordelia nearly choked on her coffee. "Rosa." "What? You marry Saturday, see? Babies come next. Is natural." Rosa's practical and tone suggested she saw nothing embarrassing about the discussion. Gideon cleared his throat. "Rosa, perhaps—" "Men," Rosa waved dismissively, "always embarrassed by life. Senorita Cordelia, you want children?" The direct question caught Cordelia off guard. In all her worry about the marriage, the future, the attack, she hadn't let herself think about children, about a family. Yes. Someday. Good. This house needs children. Too quiet for too long. Rosa nodded approvingly and headed back toward the kitchen, leaving them alone with the weight of her words. "She's right, you know," Gideon said after a moment, "about the house being too quiet. I built it thinking it would be filled with family. Someday, and now? Now I can picture it. You in the kitchen teaching our daughter to cook. A son learning to ride in the corral." His voice grew softer. "Sunday dinners with enough noise to wake the dead." The images he painted made something warm unfurl in Cordelia's chest. She could see it too. Children with his dark eyes and her stubborn chin, holiday gatherings, the ordinary magic of a life built together. "Saturday's only 3 days away," she said. "Are you ready?" "Are you?" he countered. She considered the question seriously. 3 days to prepare for a wedding that would change everything. 3 days to finish becoming someone new, not the abandoned niece of a dishonest man, not the desperate woman who'd stepped off a train with nothing, but Gideon Blackthorn's wife. "I think so, though I have nothing suitable to wear. Already handled." Gideon's smile held a hint of pride. "I sent word to the dressmaker in town. She's bringing several options this afternoon. You think of everything. I try to take care of what's mine." The possessive note in his voice should have bothered her. A week ago it would have. Now it made her feel cherished, protected in a way she'd never experienced. "Gideon?" She set down her coffee cup, suddenly needing to say something that had been weighing on her heart. "I need you to know. I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train. What happened here, what we've been through together, it's changed me." "Changed you how?" "I'm stronger, braver, more certain of what I want." She met his eyes directly. "I want this life, this ranch, this future we're building, but most of all I want you." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the growing light. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. The woman who stepped off that train was already brave. She traveled halfway across the country to help a stranger. The woman sitting beside me now. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "She's the one who saved my life, who chose to stay when she could have left, who's willing to build something beautiful out of the ashes of what other people destroyed. We're both different than we were a week ago." "Better," he agreed. "Stronger together than we ever were apart." A rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a steady pace. They watched in comfortable silence as Miguel rode up to the house, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Patron, señorita." He touched his hat respectfully. "The cattle are settled in the south pasture. Damage from the other night wasn't as bad as we feared. And the barn? Foundations sound. We can rebuild better than before." "Good." Gideon squeezed Cordelia's hand. Rebuilding seems to be what we do best around here. As Miguel headed toward the bunkhouse, Cordelia realized that was exactly what they were doing, not just repairing buildings or recovering from attacks, but building something entirely new from the pieces of their separate lives. 3 more days, she said softly. 3 more days, Gideon agreed, and then the rest of our lives. She leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm in the morning sun, and for the first time since her parents' death, Cordelia felt truly home. The dressmaker arrived with 3 women Cordelia had never seen before. Mrs. Abernathy was a rail-thin woman with sharp eyes and sharper opinions, who descended from her wagon like a general preparing for battle. Behind her came 2 younger women, carrying armfuls of fabric, ribbons, and what appeared to be an entire sewing shop's worth of supplies. "Well," Mrs. Abernathy announced, surveying Cordelia from head to toe, "you're taller than I expected, and that colouring we'll need to rethink." "Everything," Cordelia blinked. "I'm sorry. Your intended described you as plain. Clearly the man needs spectacles." The dressmaker circled her like a hawk studying prey. "This changes the entire approach. Margaret, fetch the blue silk, and the ivory taffeta. The burgundy too, with that." Ere she could carry off burgundy, "Mrs. Abernathy," Cordelia began, but the woman waved her quiet. "None of that. You're marrying Gideon Blackthorne in 2 days, which means you're representing this ranch, this county, and every woman who's ever had to make something of herself in this wilderness. We will not have you looking like a charity case." The fierce pride in the older woman's voice caught Cordelia off guard. She'd expected to be measured and fitted, perhaps offered a simple dress suitable for a quick ceremony. She hadn't expected to become a symbol. "I don't have money for anything elaborate, already settled." Mrs. Abernathy's assistant held up a dress that made Cordelia's breath catch. The ivory silk seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline. "Mr. Blackthorne's orders, the best we could manage on short notice." "He ordered this? Sent specific instructions?" The dressmaker's smile was almost maternal. "Said his bride deserved to feel beautiful on her wedding day, that she'd been through enough ugliness and deserved something lovely." Unexpected tears pricked Cordelia's eyes. Gideon had thought of this, had known somehow that having something beautiful to wear would matter to her. "Let's get you fitted." Then, Mrs. Abernathy was already bustling around her with measuring tape. "We'll need to take it in at the waist, adjust the sleeves." The next hour passed in a blur of pinning and adjusting, advice about undergarments and suggestions for her hair. But halfway through the fitting, Mrs. Abernathy's assistant, a pretty brunette named Caroline, spoke up hesitantly. "Miss Ashworth, there's something you should know. About tomorrow." "What about tomorrow?" Caroline glanced nervously at Mrs. Abernathy, who nodded encouragingly. "The whole county's coming. Word spread about the attack, about how you saved Mr. Blackthorne. Everyone wants to meet the woman who stood up to the Kellerman gang." Cordelia's stomach dropped. "Everyone?" "Near about. The Hendersons, the Petersons, all the ranch families from 20 miles around. Even some folks from town who've never set foot on a ranch before. I thought it was going to be a small ceremony." "Was supposed to be," Mrs. Abernathy said gently. "But sometimes life has other plans. You've become something of a legend, dear. The Eastern lady who turned out to be tougher than any of us expected." The weight of expectation settled on Cordelia's shoulders like a lead cloak. She'd never been comfortable being the center of attention, and now she was expected to play hostess to half the county while marrying a man she'd known for less than a week. "I don't know how to be what they expect," she admitted quietly. "What do they expect?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, genuinely curious. "Someone brave, someone who belongs here, someone who deserves Gideon Blackthorne." The 3 women exchanged glances, and Mrs. Abernathy set down her pins. "Child, you shot a man to save your future husband's life. You've survived having your whole life turned upside down, losing your family, being abandoned by your guardian, and facing down armed attackers. If that doesn't make you brave, I don't know what does. But I don't know anything about being a rancher's wife. I can't cook like Rosa. I don't understand cattle or horses or... Neither did I when I married my husband. Caroline's voice was warm with understanding. I was a city girl from Denver, scared to death of cows and convinced I'd never fit in. That was 12 years ago. What changed? I stopped trying to be someone else and started being myself. Turns out that was enough. Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. The women out here, we don't expect perfection. We expect courage, loyalty, and the willingness to work hard. You've already shown all three. Before Cordelia could respond, the sound of rapid hoofbeats drew their attention to the window. A lone rider was approaching fast, dust trailing behind his horse. "That's Tommy Patterson," Caroline observed, peering out. "He looks upset about something." They watched as the young man dismounted and hurried toward the house. Moments later, Gideon appeared on the porch, his expression growing grave as he listened to whatever news Tommy brought. "Excuse me," Cordelia said, lifting her skirts to hurry downstairs. She reached the porch as Tommy was finishing his report. "Found them this morning, Mr. Blackthorne. Both dead, shot in the back. Sheriff Morrison's already there, but he wanted you to know." "Who's dead?" Cordelia asked, though something cold in her stomach already knew. "The Reed brothers, Gideon C.," replied grimly. "Frank Kellerman's cousins. They were found outside Millbrook, along with one of the other men who rode with them. Execution style," Tommy added. "Sheriff thinks it was professional, not random." Cordelia felt the blood drain from her face. "You think Frank ordered it? From jail?" "Frank's been in a cell since the attack," Gideon said slowly. "Under guard. He couldn't have arranged this." The implication hung heavy in the air. If Frank hadn't ordered the killings, then someone else had. Someone who wanted the Kellerman gang silenced permanently. "There's more," Tommy continued reluctantly. "Sheriff found this pinned to Jake Reed's shirt." He handed Gideon a piece of paper. Gideon unfolded it, his jaw tightening as he read. When he looked up, his eyes found Cordelia's. "What does it say?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "The arrangement stands. Wedding proceeds as planned. Payment expected upon completion." The words made no sense to Cordelia, but she watched the color drain from Gideon's face as understanding dawned. "Someone hired the Kellermans," he said quietly. "The attack wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping our wedding." "But why would anyone want to?" Cordelia stopped as another, more terrible possibility occurred to her. "Unless they wanted to make sure it happened." Their eyes met across the porch, both reaching the same horrifying conclusion. The attack had been designed to fail, to drive them together, to ensure the marriage would proceed. Someone wanted Gideon Blackthorne married to Cordelia Ashworth badly enough to orchestrate violence, betrayal, and now murder. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. "Someone with a lot to gain from our union," Gideon replied grimly. "And apparently a lot to lose if it doesn't happen." As the sun began to set over the Blackthorne ranch, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Cordelia realized their troubles were far from over. Tomorrow was supposed to be their wedding day, the beginning of their new life together. Instead, it might be walking straight into a trap that had been months in the making. Gideon was already saddling his horse when Cordelia found him in the barn. "You're going to Millbrook." It wasn't a question. "Sheriff Morrison needs to see this note, and I need to see those bodies." His movements were sharp, efficient, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Someone's been playing a long game, Cordelia. I intend to find out who." "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." He turned to face her, his expression granite hard. "If someone wanted us together badly, enough to hire the Kellermans, they might not be finished. I won't risk you. And I won't sit here wondering if you're riding into another trap." She lifted her chin stubbornly. "Besides, I might see something you miss. A woman's perspective could be useful." "This isn't a social call. We're talking about murdered men. I know exactly what we're talking about." Her voice carried a steel edge he'd never heard before. "Someone has been manipulating our lives, Gideon. My uncle's sudden departure, the financial collapse, even our meeting. What if none of it was coincidence?" The thought had been nagging at her since Tommy delivered his news. Too many convenient disasters, too many perfectly timed catastrophes. Uncle Mortimer's letter arriving exactly when it did. The Kellerman attack happening just after their engagement. Now murders to silence witnesses. Gideon's hands stilled on the saddle rigging. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking my Uncle Mortimer might not be the bumbling fool he appeared to be." She began pacing the barn's center aisle, her mind racing. What if the shipping business collapse was orchestrated? What if he was paid to bring me here and then disappear? Paid by whom? Someone who needed this marriage to happen. Someone who benefits from the Blackthorn Ranch being tied to what? What did my family have that anyone would want? Gideon was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Your father was Jonathan Ashworth." "Yes, the railroad surveyor." Cordelia blinked. "How did you know that?" "I never mentioned—" "Because 3 years ago, your father surveyed a route through this valley, a route that would run right through Blackthorn land and make whoever controlled it very wealthy." His expression was grim. "A route that several powerful men have been trying to buy me out for ever since." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The marriage contract. If something happened to you, my widow would inherit everything. And if that widow happened to be the daughter of the man who surveyed the route, who better to understand its value? Who better to negotiate with the railroad companies? Cordelia sank onto a hay bale, the full scope of the manipulation hitting her. "They needed us married, needed me here, established as your wife before they could—" She looked up at him, horror dawning. "Gideon, they're planning to kill you." "After the wedding," he agreed grimly, "once you're legally my heir." "But I'd never sell the ranch. They don't know that. And once I'm dead, they'd have time to convince you, or intimidate you, or worse." The barn felt suddenly cold despite the afternoon heat. Everything, her uncle's betrayal, the convenient financial ruin, even her growing feelings for Gideon, all of it had been orchestrated by people who saw them as chess pieces to be moved around a board. "We have to call off the wedding," she said quietly. "Do we?" Gideon's voice was thoughtful. "Or do we spring their trap first?" "What do you mean?" "I mean we let them think their plan is working. We get married tomorrow, in front of the whole county, and then we wait for them to make their move." "That's insane. You'd be painting a target on yourself." "The target's already there, Cordelia. Has been since your father drew those survey maps. The only question is whether we let them choose the ground for the final confrontation, or whether we choose it ourselves." She stared at him, seeing not just the man she'd fallen in love with, but the strategic mind that had built an empire from nothing. "You want to use our wedding as bait? Our wedding, our guests, everything. If they're planning to strike, tomorrow gives them the perfect opportunity. Everyone they need to impress will be there to witness it, including me, especially. You're the key to everything, Cordelia. Without you as my legal widow, they get nothing." The cold calculation in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sparked something fierce and determined in her chest. These people had stolen her uncle's loyalty, destroyed her sense of security, and now they wanted to take the first happiness she'd known since her parents' death. "What do we need to do?" Gideon's smile was sharp as a blade. "First, we ride to Millbrook and confirm what we suspect. Then we come home and plan a wedding that our enemies will never forget. The ride to Millbrook took 2 hours, long enough for Cordelia to notice things she'd missed before. The way Gideon constantly scanned the horizon, how he chose routes that offered cover and multiple escape paths, the careful way he positioned himself between her and any potential threat. "You've done this before," she observed as they crested a hill overlooking the small town. "Done what?" "Planned for war." He was quiet for a moment. "I spent 3 years in the cavalry before I came home to run the ranch. Some lessons stick with you." Another piece of the puzzle she was still assembling. The man she was marrying had depths she was only beginning to discover. Sheriff Morrison was waiting for them at the undertaker's, his weathered face grim. "Glad you came, Gideon. This is worse than Tommy told you." The bodies were laid out in the back room, covered with white sheets. Morrison pulled back the first one, revealing Jake Reed's pale face. Single shot to the back of the head. Professional work. He moved to the second body. "Same with his brother, but it's what we found in Jake's saddlebags that's interesting." He produced a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. "More money than any of the Kellermans ever saw in their lives. And this." He held up a telegram, yellowed and creased from folding. Cordelia read it over Gideon's shoulder. "Attack proceeds as planned. Stop ensure Blackthorn survives. Stop payment on completion. Stop. Sent from San Francisco. Morrison." "Noted. 2 weeks ago." San Francisco. Gideon's voice was deadly quiet. "That's where the Central Pacific Railroad has their headquarters. And where my uncle claimed to be investing in railroad ventures," Cordelia added, pieces clicking together. "Sheriff, was there anything else? Any other evidence?" Morrison hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer. "This was pinned inside Jake's jacket. Figured you should see it before I file the report." The second note was written in a different hand, more elegant script. "Wedding proceeds tomorrow. Be ready. The widow must be protected until documents are signed." Cordelia's hands were shaking as she handed the note back. "They're going to kill you at our wedding." "They're going to try," Gideon corrected, "but we're going to be ready for them." As they rode home through the gathering dusk, Cordelia found herself thinking not about the danger ahead, but about the man beside her. In the space of a week, he'd offered her shelter, protection, and love. Tomorrow she would stand beside him and promise to face whatever came next as his partner, even if what came next was a battle for their lives. "Gideon?" she said as the ranch lights came into view. "Yes? Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know. I choose this. I choose you, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." His smile was soft in the moonlight. "Then we'd better make sure we both survive long enough to enjoy it." The wedding dress was gone. Cordelia stared at the empty wardrobe, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ivory silk that had been carefully pressed and hanging ready for this morning had vanished, leaving only the faint scent of lavender sachets and the echo of her own ragged breathing. "Rosa!" Her voice cracked as she called down the hallway. "Rosa, where? Señorita!" Rosa appeared in the doorway, then stopped short at the sight of Cordelia's stricken face. "¿Qué pasa? What is wrong?" "The dress. It's gone." Rosa's dark eyes widened, then narrowed with understanding. She moved to the window, peering out at the ranch yard, where guests were already beginning to arrive for the ceremony. "They want you to run," she said quietly. "Make you think you cannot marry today." Who would? But Cordelia already knew. The same people who had orchestrated everything else, who wanted her desperate and dependent when Gideon died. Without the wedding dress, she'd have no choice but to postpone the ceremony, giving them time to regroup and plan a different approach. "We have other dresses," Rosa said firmly, moving to the smaller wardrobe. "Simple, but you will be beautiful." But as Rosa searched through the meager selection, they both heard it, the unmistakable sound of riders approaching fast. Too many riders, moving with military precision. Cordelia rushed to the window. A group of men in dark suits were dismounting near the house, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Not wedding guests, not neighbors come to celebrate. Get. Gideon, she whispered to Rosa. Now. But it was too late. The front door burst open downstairs, and unfamiliar voices filled the house. Calm, professional, dangerous. Mrs. Ashworth, we need to speak with you. The voice belonged to a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes who appeared at the bedroom doorway. Behind him stood two others, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. Miss Ashworth, Cordelia corrected, though her voice trembled. And you are? Marcus Webb, representing certain business interests in San Francisco. I think you know why we're here. Rosa had gone pale, pressing herself against the wall. In the distance, Cordelia could hear more voices, Gideon's men being gathered, controlled, neutralized. The wedding is postponed, Webb continued conversationally. There are documents to be signed, arrangements to be made. Your cooperation would be appreciated. And if I don't cooperate, Webb's smile was thin as winter ice. Then your bridegroom experiences an unfortunate accident. Today has too many witnesses for our original plan, but accidents happen all the time on ranches. The threat was clear. Sign whatever papers they wanted or watch Gideon die. What documents? Power of attorney, primarily, giving your Uncle Mortimer, who isn't actually in California, by the way, the right to manage your affairs, including any property you might inherit. Webb pulled out a leather portfolio, perfectly legal, perfectly reasonable for a young woman overwhelmed by recent events. Cordelia's mind raced. Once she signed, they'd have legal control over the ranch without needing to kill Gideon immediately. They could take their time, make his death look natural, avoid the suspicion that would come from a bride widowed on her wedding day. I need to see him first, she said, to tell him the wedding is postponed. I'm afraid that's not possible. Then I don't sign. Webb's patience cracked slightly. Miss Ashworth, you seem to misunderstand your situation. We have your intended husband, his foreman, and most of his men under guard. We have enough evidence to frame any of them for the Reed brothers' murders. Your cooperation isn't a request. But as he spoke, Cordelia heard something that made her heart leap. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the house, followed by a woman's sharp cry. Then Rosa's voice, loud and carrying. Fuego! Fire! Everyone out! Smoke began seeping under the bedroom door, and Webb cursed. In the confusion of shouting voices and running feet, Cordelia saw her chance. She grabbed the water pitcher from the washstand and hurled it at Webb's head, then dove for the window as his men rushed to help him. The drop to the porch roof was further than it looked, but she rolled with the impact the way her father had taught her years ago. From there, she could see the entire yard, Webb's men trying to maintain control as smoke poured from the kitchen, wedding guests scattering in panic, and Gideon fighting his way toward the house. Their eyes met across the chaos, and she saw him change direction, heading for the old oak tree beside the house, the same tree she'd climbed down to reach the porch roof. "Behind you!" she shouted as one of Webb's men emerged from the kitchen, gun drawn. Gideon spun and tackled the man, both of them going down hard. More shots erupted from various parts of the yard as his cowboys fought back against their captors. What had been planned as a quiet wedding was turning into a full-scale battle. Cordelia worked her way along the roof to the tree, grateful for the practical boots Rosa had found her instead of delicate wedding slippers. As she reached the trunk, strong hands lifted her down. Miguel, his weathered face split by a fierce grin. "Ready to get married, señorita?" "What?" "The padre. He is here." "The dress." Rosa hid it in the barn. "We marry you now, before these bastardos can stop us." Through the smoke and chaos, Cordelia could see it happening. Rosa directing wedding guests toward the barn, while Gideon's men provided cover. The old priest from town, Father Martinez, clutching his Bible and moving with surprising speed for a man of 80. "But the fighting will be over soon," Miguel said with certainty. "These city men, they do not know how to fight cowboys on their own land." He was right. Webb's professionals were trained for intimidation and assassination, not open warfare, against men who'd spent their lives fighting drought, rustlers, and hostile elements. The ranch hands moved with practiced coordination, using every building and fence for cover. Within 10 minutes, it was over. Webb and his surviving men stood with their hands raised, surrounded by rifle-wielding cowboys. 2 of the attackers lay still in the yard, while others nursed wounds that would heal. "Now," Father Martinez called out in his reedy but carrying voice, "shall we have this wedding?" And so, 20 minutes later, Cordelia found herself standing in the barn, wearing her beautiful ivory dress, surrounded by neighbors and ranch hands, exchanging vows with the man who had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. When Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed tasted of smoke and danger and promise. When they broke apart, both were grinning. "Well, Mrs. Blackthorne," Gideon said softly, "think you can handle being married to me?" "I think," Cordelia replied, looking around at the faces of people who had risked their lives to make this moment possible, "I can handle anything as long as we're facing it together." Later, after the prisoners were handed over to Sheriff Morrison, and the last of the wedding guests had departed, Cordelia sat on the front porch with her husband, watching the sun set over their land. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we build the life we want," Gideon replied, his arm tightening around her. "We rebuild the barn, expand the herd, maybe add some rooms to the house." "For children?" "For children," he agreed, and the warmth in his voice made her heart flutter. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Cordelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A week ago, she'd been a desperate woman, accepting a marriage of convenience. Tonight, she was a wife, a partner, a woman who had found her home and her heart in the most unexpected place. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too," Gideon replied, "more than I ever thought possible." And in the distance, the cattle lowed peacefully in the pastures, the sound carrying on the evening breeze like a lullaby for the new life they were building together. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.